I woke up to find my expensive snow shovel missing from my front porch. And the only thing more ridiculous than someone stealing a shovel was discovering that the thieves were the 3 board members of my homeowners association. My name is Grant Kellerman, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Commons development in Lakewood, Colorado, for exactly 8 months when this nightmare began. I moved here from Denver thinking a quiet suburban life would be exactly what I needed after my divorce. The townhouse was nice, the neighbors seemed normal, and I figured the HOA fees were just part of the package. What I did not expect was to become the target of the most vindictive, power-hungry group of middle-aged busybodies I had ever encountered. It started innocuously enough. I got my first violation notice in October for leaving my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. I had forgotten to wheel them back after work. Fine. Whatever. Then I got another notice because my mailbox flag was slightly bent. Then another because I had parked my truck in my driveway facing the wrong direction. Each violation came with a $50 fine, and each notice was signed by Sharon Patterson, the HOA president, in her distinctive purple ink. Sharon was exactly what you would picture when someone says the name Karen, but with an S. Mid-50s, blonde highlights that looked like straw, always wearing velour tracksuits in various shades of pink and purple, and she drove a white Lexus SUV with a bumper sticker that said, "I speak to managers for a living." Her 2 board member cronies were Deborah Wilkins and Patricia Marsh, both cut from the same cloth. The 3 of them patrolled the neighborhood like it was their personal fiefdom. By December, I had racked up over $600 in fines, most of which I considered completely bogus. I paid them because the HOA bylaws gave them the power to put a lien on my property, but I was furious. Then came the blizzard. Colorado gets snow. That is just a fact of life. But the blizzard that hit Lakewood on January 7th was something else entirely. 23 inches fell in less than 36 hours. The city was basically shut down. I had invested in a really good snow shovel back in November, one of those ergonomic ones with the curved handle that saves your back. It cost me $90 at the hardware store, but it was worth every penny. I spent 3 hours on the morning of January 8th clearing my driveway and the walkway to my front door. The HOA rules stated that homeowners were responsible for clearing their own driveways and the sidewalk in front of their property within 24 hours of snowfall. I was actually ahead of schedule. I left the shovel leaning against the wall next to my front door, right under the small overhang that kept that area mostly dry. I went inside, made myself some coffee, and settled in to work from home since my office was closed due to the weather. Around noon, I decided to go clear the sidewalk in front of my place since the snow had finally stopped. I opened my front door and the shovel was gone, just completely gone. I stood there for a moment, thinking maybe the wind had blown it over, but there was no wind. The day was still and cold and bright. I walked around my small front yard, checked the side of the house, even looked in my truck bed thinking maybe I had put it there and forgotten. Nothing. That is when I noticed the tracks in the snow. Boot prints, coming up my walkway, stopping right where the shovel had been, then heading back down toward the street. The prints were small, maybe a woman's size 7 or 8. I followed them with my eyes and saw they led to a set of tire tracks where someone had pulled up to the curb. I was baffled. Who steals a snow shovel? We just had a massive blizzard. Everyone needed shovels. But why mine specifically? I walked down to the sidewalk and looked around. Several of my neighbors were outside digging out their cars and driveways. I noticed that Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived 3 doors down, was struggling with a cheap plastic shovel. "Mrs. Chen, did you see anyone near my house this morning?" I called out. She looked up, her face red from exertion. "Oh, yes. Those HOA ladies were driving around. I saw them stop in front of your place maybe an hour ago." My stomach dropped. The HOA board, the blonde one and the one with the short red hair. They were in the blonde one's white SUV, Sharon and Deborah. Of course. I went back inside and checked my doorbell camera. I had installed a Ring doorbell back in November after the violation notices started piling up, thinking I might need evidence if things escalated. I pulled up the footage on my phone and there it was, clear as day. At 11:17 that morning, Sharon Patterson's white Lexus pulled up in front of my house. Sharon got out of the driver's side, wearing a puffy pink coat and Ugg boots. Deborah Wilkins emerged from the passenger side in a similar getup, but in baby blue. They walked up to my door, looked around to make sure no one was watching, and Sharon picked up my shovel. Deborah actually laughed. You could see her mouth moving and both of them grinning like they had just pulled off the heist of the century. Sharon carried the shovel back to her SUV, put it in the back, and they drove off. I watched the footage 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each viewing. They had stolen my property, on camera. I saved the video immediately and backed it up to my cloud storage. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. Would they even care about a stolen shovel? It seemed like such a small thing, but it was not about the shovel. It was about the principle. These women thought they could do whatever they wanted because they had a little bit of power in the neighborhood. I decided to try the direct approach first. I pulled up the HOA contact list and called Sharon's cell phone. She answered on the 3rd ring. Sharon Patterson speaking. "Sharon, this is Grant Kellerman from 1847 Oakmont Drive. My snow shovel was stolen from my front porch this morning, and I have security footage showing you and Deborah taking it." There was a pause, then a laugh. An actual laugh. "Oh, Grant, that shovel was in violation of the HOA bylaws. You cannot leave equipment visible from the street. It is unsightly. We were well within our rights to remove it." "Remove it? You stole it. That is theft." "No, dear, that is enforcement. You will receive a violation notice in the mail, and you can retrieve your shovel from the HOA storage unit once you pay the fine. $150. I could not believe what I was hearing. "You are holding my shovel hostage." "We are holding property that was in violation of community standards until the appropriate fine is paid. Have a nice day, Grant." She hung up. I stood there staring at my phone, absolutely seething. This was insane. This was beyond anything I had experienced with them before. I called the Lakewood Police non-emergency number and explained the situation. The dispatcher was sympathetic, but told me that since it was a civil matter involving an HOA, I would need to file a report and possibly take them to small claims court. An officer could come by to take a statement, but criminal charges for a shovel theft were unlikely unless I wanted to push for prosecution. Officer Martinez showed up about 2 hours later. He was a young guy, probably late 20s, and he seemed genuinely annoyed on my behalf when I showed him the doorbell footage. "That is pretty blatant," he said, watching the video on my laptop. "I can file a report, but honestly, with HOAs, it gets complicated. They hide behind their bylaws and claim they are acting within their authority. But it is my property. I paid for it. They took it without permission." "I agree with you. Let me file the report and you will have a case number. That might help if you take them to small claims court. But I would also recommend contacting a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes." He took my statement, gave me a case number, and left. I felt defeated. These people had literally stolen from me on camera, and there was not much anyone could do about it immediately. That evening, I went to check my mailbox and found a violation notice taped to my front door. It stated that I had left equipment and tools visible from the street, creating an eyesore for the community. The fine was $150, payable within 10 days, and my shovel could be retrieved from the HOA storage facility once payment was received and proof of payment was provided. I took a photo of the notice and added it to my growing folder of HOA documentation. Then I did what any reasonable person in the modern age does when they are frustrated and looking for advice. I posted about it on Reddit. I wrote out the whole story on the legal advice subreddit, including links to the doorbell footage I had uploaded to YouTube as an unlisted video. I expected maybe a few comments, some advice about small claims court, maybe some sympathy. What I did not expect was for the post to blow up. Within 3 hours, I had over 2,000 upvotes and hundreds of comments. People were outraged. They were sharing stories of their own HOA nightmares. Some suggested I contact local news stations. Others recommended specific lawyers. A few people said I should pay the fine and move on, but they were heavily downvoted. One comment stood out. A user named Colorado News Hound wrote, "I am a producer at KDEN Channel 9 in Denver." This is exactly the kind of story we cover. If you are interested in going public with this, DM me. I sat there staring at that comment for a long time. Did I want to go public? Would that make things better or worse? Sharon and her cronies already had it out for me. But then again, maybe public pressure was exactly what was needed. I sent the DM. By the next morning, I had an email from Jessica Romano, an investigative reporter at KDEN. She wanted to meet with me, review the footage, and potentially run a story. We set up a time for that afternoon at a coffee shop in downtown Lakewood. Jessica was sharp, professional, and clearly interested in the story. She watched the doorbell footage on her tablet, taking notes the whole time. "This is good," she said. "Really good. The footage is clear, there is no ambiguity about what happened, and HOA overreach is always a hot topic. People love these stories." "I just want my shovel back," I said, "and I want them to know they cannot just do whatever they want." "I get that. Let me pitch this to my editor. If he approves, we would come to your house, do an interview, get some B-roll of the neighborhood, and reach out to the HOA for comment. This could air as soon as tomorrow evening if we move fast." I agreed. At that point, I had nothing to lose. The news crew showed up the next morning. Jessica, a cameraman named Tom, and a production assistant spent about 2 hours at my place. I gave an interview standing in front of my house, showing where the shovel had been. We reviewed the doorbell footage on camera. Jessica asked me about the history with the HOA, and I showed her the stack of violation notices I had received over the past few months. "Have you tried to resolve this directly with the board?" Jessica asked. I called Sharon Patterson right after it happened. She told me it was enforcement, not theft, and that I had to pay $150 to get my shovel back. "Did you pay it?" "No. Why would I pay a fine for them stealing my property?" Jessica nodded, making notes. We reached out to Sharon Patterson and the HOA board for comment. They declined to do an on-camera interview, but they sent a written statement. "Let me read it to you." She pulled out her phone and read. "The Meadowbrook Commons HOA takes community standards very seriously. All enforcement actions are conducted in accordance with our bylaws, which every homeowner agrees to upon purchase. Mr. Kellerman has repeatedly violated community standards, and the removal of equipment from his property was a lawful enforcement action. We stand by our decision." I shook my head. Unbelievable. The piece aired that evening on the 6 o'clock news. I watched it from my couch, feeling surreal. There I was on television, talking about my stolen shovel. They showed the doorbell footage, which was the real star of the segment. You could clearly see Sharon and Deborah taking the shovel, and Deborah laughing. Jessica's voiceover pointed out that, while HOAs have authority to enforce bylaws, taking personal property without notice or due process raises legal questions. They included the HOA's statement and ended with a shot of Jessica standing in front of the Meadowbrook Commons sign, saying, "The question residents here are asking is, where is the line between enforcement and theft?" My phone started buzzing immediately. Friends and coworkers were texting me. My brother called from Seattle saying he had seen the story shared on Twitter. My ex-wife even sent a text saying that HOA is insane, good for you for standing up to them. But the biggest response came from the neighborhood. By the next morning, I had a dozen neighbors knocking on my door or stopping me when I went outside. Apparently, Sharon, Deborah, and Patricia had been terrorizing people for years, but no one had pushed back because they were afraid of fines and liens. Mrs. Chen came over with homemade cookies and told me that the HOA had fined her $400 last year for having a garden gnome in her front yard that they deemed inappropriate. Mr. Richardson from across the street said they had fined him repeatedly for parking his work van in his driveway, even though there was nothing in the bylaws prohibiting commercial vehicles. The young couple at the end of the block, Sarah and Mike, told me they were fined $200 for putting up Christmas lights 3 days before the approved decorating period. Everyone had a story. Everyone was fed up. And now, everyone was talking about it. The story went viral online. KDN posted the segment on their YouTube channel, and it racked up over 300,000 views in 2 days. Local radio stations picked it up. The Denver Post ran an article. Suddenly, Meadowbrook Commons HOA was infamous. Sharon did not take it well. 3 days after the story aired, I found a certified letter in my mailbox. It was from the HOA's attorney, a firm called Henderson and Associates. The letter stated that I was being fined an additional $500 for bringing disrepute to the community and violating the confidentiality agreements inherent in the HOA covenant. It also stated that if I did not remove the doorbell footage from the internet within 72 hours, they would pursue legal action for defamation. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud reading it. They were threatening to sue me for posting a video of them committing theft. I forwarded the letter to a lawyer that one of the Reddit users had recommended, an attorney named Barbara Kensington who specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for not taking any nonsense. She called me within an hour. "Grant, this letter is a joke," she said. "They have no grounds for defamation. The footage is factual. You are not violating any confidentiality agreement by posting video from your own doorbell camera. This is a slap-suit threat, trying to intimidate you into silence. What should I do? Ignore it. Do not take the video down." In fact, I would recommend posting their letter online too, with personal information redacted. Let people see how they are trying to bully you, and I think we should file a lawsuit against them for theft, harassment, and abuse of authority. A lawsuit is not that expensive. It can be, but I think we can make this work. Your story has gotten a lot of attention, and I would be willing to take this on a contingency basis. Plus, there is a good chance we can get your legal fees covered if we win. These HOA board members have been abusing their power, and it is time someone held them accountable. I agreed. Within a week, Barbara filed a lawsuit in Jefferson County Court against Sharon Patterson, Deborah Wilkins, Patricia Marsh, and the Meadowbrook Commons HOA. We were suing for theft, conversion of property, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of Colorado's Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. We were seeking return of my property, reimbursement of all fines I'd paid, compensation for legal fees, and punitive damages. The lawsuit made the news too. Jessica Romano did a follow-up story, and this time, several of my neighbors agreed to be interviewed. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Richardson, and Sarah and Mike all went on camera talking about how the HOA had harassed them. The story painted a picture of an HOA board that had gone rogue, using their authority to bully residents and collect excessive fines. The pressure kept building. The property management company that administered the HOA, a firm called Summit Property Management, issued a statement distancing themselves from the board's actions. They said they had advised the board that removing personal property was not an appropriate enforcement method, but the board had acted independently. Then things got interesting. One of the residents, a lawyer named Craig Morrison, started circulating a petition to recall the entire HOA board. Under Colorado law and our HOA's governing documents, a special election could be called if 20% of homeowners signed a petition. Within 2 weeks, Craig had signatures from over 40% of the community. Sharon, Deborah, and Patricia tried to fight it. They sent out a mass email to all residents claiming that I was a troublemaker who refused to follow the rules, and that the media had twisted the story. The email included a list of all my violations and stated that I had been repeatedly non-compliant with community standards. That email was a mistake. It violated Colorado's fair debt collection laws by publicly disclosing what they considered to be my debts, and it opened them up to additional legal liability. Barbara immediately amended our lawsuit to include that violation. The special election was scheduled for March 15th. In the meantime, my case was getting attention from beyond just the local news. A few national news websites picked up the story. A YouTuber who specialized in HOA horror stories did a 20-minute video about it that got over 1 million views. I was getting messages from people all over the country sharing their own HOA nightmares and thanking me for standing up. But through all of this, I still did not have my shovel back. I brought this up to Barbara, and she laughed. That is actually good for us. Every day they keep it, it is another day of evidence that this was theft, not enforcement. But if you need a shovel, just buy another one and keep the receipt. We will add it to the damages. I did buy another shovel, a cheaper one this time, but I kept the receipt like she said. In February, things escalated in an unexpected way. The Lakewood City Council got involved. Apparently, they had been receiving complaints about Meadowbrook Commons HOA for years, but nothing had ever been done because HOAs are generally self-governing. But with all the media attention, the council decided to launch an investigation into whether the HOA was operating in compliance with state laws. A city auditor named Margaret Fletcher was assigned to review the HOA's financial records and governance practices. This was significant because if they found evidence of fraud or mismanagement, the city could impose fines or even dissolve the HOA board. Sharon and her crew were furious. At a community meeting in late February, which I attended along with about 60 other residents, Sharon stood at the front of the room and went on a rant about how I had destroyed the community and brought outside interference into their affairs. She actually pointed at me and called me a troublemaker and a narcissist. Mrs. Chen stood up and said, "You stole his shovel, Sharon. We all saw the video." The room erupted in agreement. People started shouting about their own grievances. Mr. Richardson accused the board of selective enforcement, pointing out that Sharon herself had holiday decorations up past the approved period. Sarah stood up and said the board had threatened them with foreclosure over a $300 fine for having a wreath on their door that was too large. The meeting devolved into chaos. Patricia Marsh tried to call for order, but no one was listening. Eventually, Sharon just grabbed her papers and stormed out, with Deborah and Patricia following. 2 days later, the city auditor released her preliminary findings. It was damning. Margaret Fletcher had found evidence that the HOA board had collected over $70,000 in fines over the past 3 years, but only about $30,000 was accounted for in the HOA's financial records. The rest was missing. Additionally, the board had been paying themselves administrative fees that were not authorized in the HOA's governing documents, totaling about $15,000 over 2 years. In other words, they had been stealing. Not just my shovel, but money from the entire community. The story exploded all over again. Jessica Romano did a special investigative report. The Denver Post ran a front-page story in their local section. The district attorney's office announced they were opening a criminal investigation into potential embezzlement and fraud. The special election happened on March 15th, but by that point, it was almost irrelevant. Sharon, Deborah, and Patricia had all resigned from the board a week earlier, citing health reasons and undue stress. Nobody believed them. They resigned because they knew what was coming. On March 23rd, the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office filed criminal charges against all 3 of them. Sharon Patterson was charged with theft, embezzlement, and fraud. Deborah Wilkins and Patricia Marsh were charged with embezzlement and fraud. The charges were serious, with potential prison time if convicted. My civil lawsuit was still ongoing, but with the criminal charges filed, Barbara was confident we would win. The evidence was overwhelming. In April, I finally got a call from the Lakewood Police Department. Officer Martinez, the same cop who had taken my initial report, told me they had executed a search warrant on the HOA storage unit and recovered my shovel. He personally brought it to my house. I have to admit, when you first called about a stolen shovel, I did not think it would lead to criminal charges against the entire HOA board, he said, handing it to me. I looked at the shovel, this $90 piece of equipment that had caused so much chaos. Neither did I. For what it is worth, you did the right thing. These people were stealing from the whole community. The criminal cases moved slowly, as they always do. Sharon tried to fight the charges, claiming she had done nothing wrong and that the missing money was due to accounting errors. But the evidence was clear. The city auditor had traced payments from the HOA account to her personal account, as well as cash withdrawals that coincided with board meetings. In September, Sharon Patterson pleaded guilty to embezzlement and theft. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA in the amount of $42,000. Deborah and Patricia both took plea deals, receiving probation and restitution orders. My civil lawsuit settled in October. The HOA's insurance company, not wanting to go to trial, offered a settlement of $35,000. Barbara advised me to take it. The money covered all the fines I had paid, my legal fees, the cost of my replacement shovel, and a good chunk of compensation for the stress and harassment. I also got a written apology from the new HOA board, which had been elected in a special vote and was made up of reasonable people who actually wanted to serve the community. The whole ordeal taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, even when it seems like a small issue. It was never really about the shovel. It was about people with a little bit of power thinking they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. Mrs. Chen told me at a community barbecue in November that I was a hero. I did not feel like a hero. I just felt like a guy who wanted his shovel back and got tired of being pushed around. The new HOA board instituted a bunch of reforms. They brought in an independent accounting firm to manage the finances. They created a grievance process for residents who felt they were being unfairly targeted. They reduced the violation fines to reasonable amounts and got rid of ridiculous rules like the restriction on garden gnomes. The neighborhood actually started to feel like a community instead of a police state. I still live in Meadowbrook Commons. My shovel sits in my garage now, not on my front porch, but that is just common sense. Every time I use it, though, I think about that crazy few months when a stolen shovel became a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny. Jessica Romano won an Emmy for her investigative reporting on the HOA embezzlement scandal. She sent me a nice note thanking me for being willing to go public with the story. I framed it and hung it in my home office, right next to a printout of the doorbell footage that started everything. People still recognize me sometimes around Lakewood. The guy whose shovel got stolen by the HOA. It is a weird thing to be known for, but I guess there are worse legacies. At least I made a difference. At least Sharon Patterson is no longer terrorizing homeowners from behind a clipboard and a purple pen. The whole experience made me realize how important it is to document everything, especially when dealing with people who have authority over you. That doorbell camera was the best investment I ever made. Without that footage, it would have been my word against theirs, and who knows how it would have turned out. I also learned that communities are stronger when people stand together. Once I spoke up, so many others found the courage to share their stories. We were all dealing with the same abuse, but everyone felt alone until someone broke the silence. On the one-year anniversary of the shovel theft, some of my neighbors threw a party. They called it Shovel Day, and someone even made a cake with a fondant shovel on top. It was ridiculous and funny and kind of touching. We stood around in Mr. Richardson's backyard, eating cake and laughing about how absurd the whole thing had been. Mrs. Chen made a toast to Grant for reminding us that sometimes you have to fight back, even when it is just about a shovel. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt genuinely grateful. Not for the chaos or the stress or the months of legal battles, but for the reminder that ordinary people can stand up to bullies and win. The criminal cases had been fully resolved by the end of the year. Sharon served her time in a minimum security facility and was released after 12 months for good behavior. She moved out of Meadowbrook Commons immediately after her release. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she relocated to Arizona to live with her sister. Deborah and Patricia also moved away, neither wanting to face the community they had helped victimize. The HOA recovered most of the stolen money through the restitution orders and insurance claims. The new board used some of those funds to improve community amenities, including fixing the playground and repaving some of the streets. It was satisfying to see something positive come out of the whole mess. Barbara Kensington became something of a local celebrity in the HOA law world. She started getting calls from homeowners all over Colorado dealing with similar issues. She told me she had never seen a case quite like mine, where a single doorbell video led to the downfall of an entire board and criminal convictions. She occasionally used my case as an example in seminars about HOA law and homeowner rights. As for me, life returned to normal. I kept working my job in IT project management, kept living in my townhouse, and tried to stay out of neighborhood drama. The new HOA board was professional and fair. I have not received a single violation notice since they took over. My trash cans can sit in my driveway for an extra day without anyone threatening to put a lien on my house. I did make one change, though. I installed security cameras covering every angle of my property. Front door, back door, driveway, and yard. Maybe it is overkill, but after everything that happened, I figure it is better to be safe. Plus, the footage has come in handy for innocent things, like when a delivery driver left a package at the wrong house, or when I wanted to see which raccoon had been getting into the neighborhood trash cans. The story still gets shared online occasionally. Every few months, someone discovers the original Reddit post or the news footage, and it makes the rounds again on social media. I get messages from people telling me their own HOA horror stories, asking for advice, or just thanking me for exposing what can happen when HOA boards go unchecked. I always give them the same advice. Document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. Most HOA disputes do not end up in criminal court, but they do not have to. Sometimes just shining a light on bad behavior is enough to make it stop. Looking back, the whole thing still feels surreal. I moved to Meadowbrook Commons looking for peace and quiet after a difficult divorce. Instead, I got embroiled in a legal battle over a snow shovel that ended with criminal convictions and settlements and local news fame. It was not what I planned, but maybe it was what I needed. The experience taught me that I was stronger than I thought. During my marriage, I had often avoided conflict, let things slide to keep the peace, and prioritized other people's comfort over my own sense of what was right. But when Sharon Patterson stole my shovel and laughed about it, something inside me said enough. No more letting people walk over me. No more avoiding confrontation at all costs. That shift in mindset changed more than just my relationship with the HOA. It affected how I approached my work, my friendships, and my family relationships. I started setting boundaries, speaking up when something was not right, and advocating for myself. It sounds dramatic to say a stolen shovel changed my life, but in a way, it did. My brother visited from Seattle in December, about 11 months after the whole thing started. We were sitting in my living room and he looked around at the framed news article, the Emmy thank you note from Jessica, and the silly photos from Shovel Day. "You know what is crazy," he said. "You are happier now than I have seen you in years." He was right. Despite all the stress and conflict, or maybe because of it, I felt more like myself than I had in a long time. I had found my voice again. I had connected with my community. I had stood up to bullies and won. Those things mattered more than a peaceful, quiet life where I kept my head down and hoped no one noticed me. We still joke about it, my friends and family. At Thanksgiving, my cousin asked if anyone was going to steal the turkey. At Christmas, my dad gave me a snow shovel as a gag gift, a cheap plastic one from the dollar store with a bow on it. I laughed and put it in the garage next to my recovered shovel, my $90 symbol of resistance. The weather forecast called for snow in January, almost exactly a year after the original theft. I checked my garage to make sure both shovels were ready. The expensive one, now scarred with evidence tape residue that never quite came off, and the cheap backup I had bought during the height of the conflict. I also had a bag of ice melt, a snow brush for my truck, and a pair of insulated gloves. I was prepared this time. For the snow, for whatever might come next, for standing up for myself when it mattered. Sharon Patterson and her cronies had tried to make me feel small, to punish me for not falling in line with their petty rules and power trips. Instead, they had inadvertently taught me one of the most valuable lessons of my adult life. Sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing, and sometimes standing up for yourself over something as simple as a snow shovel can change everything. The neighborhood had changed too. People were more engaged now, actually attending board meetings and paying attention to how the HOA was run. The new board published detailed financial reports every quarter. They held open forums where residents could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. The sense of community improved dramatically when people were not living in fear of arbitrary fines and harassment. I ran into Craig Morrison, the lawyer who had organized the recall petition, at the grocery store one afternoon. He thanked me again for speaking up. "You know, Grant, what you did was important beyond just this neighborhood," he said. "HOAs across the state have taken notice. Property management companies are reviewing their practices. Some legislation is being proposed to add more oversight and protect homeowner rights. You started something bigger than you probably realize." Maybe he was right. I had not set out to change HOA law or start a movement. I just wanted my shovel back and felt that what happened was wrong. But if my willingness to fight back helped other people in similar situations, then maybe all the stress and chaos had a purpose beyond my own personal vindication. The snow came in mid-January. Another big storm, but not quite as intense as the previous year's blizzard. I grabbed my recovered shovel, the expensive ergonomic one, and headed outside. The curved handle really did make a difference on my back. I cleared my driveway efficiently, waved to neighbors doing the same, and left the shovel leaning against my garage door while I went inside for water. When I came back out 15 minutes later, the shovel was exactly where I had left it. No mysterious boot prints in the snow. No tire tracks from someone pulling up to steal my property. Just a quiet neighborhood where people cleared their driveways and went about their lives without drama. That was when I knew things had really changed. The fear was gone. The sense that I was being watched and judged for every tiny infraction had disappeared. I could leave my shovel outside without worrying about it being confiscated. I could put my trash cans away the next morning instead of rushing home from work. I could live in my own home without constantly looking over my shoulder. Freedom, I realized, was not just about big, dramatic moments. It was also about being able to leave a shovel by your garage door without anxiety. As winter turned to spring, the community continued to heal. The new board organized neighborhood events, including a spring cleanup day where everyone worked together to pick up winter debris and plant flowers in the common areas. It was the kind of thing the old board would have mandated with threats of fines. Instead, people volunteered because they wanted to, because it felt good to work together to make the neighborhood nicer. I spent a Saturday morning pulling weeds from the flower beds near the entrance sign with Mrs. Chen, Mr. Richardson, and a handful of other residents. We talked and laughed, and nobody mentioned violations or fines or rules. It was just neighbors helping neighbors, the way it should have been all along. Barbara called me in April with news that the settlement money had been fully processed and would be deposited into my account within a week. She also told me that she had been contacted by a publisher interested in a book about HOA abuse and reform, and they wanted to include my story. "You would get a portion of the proceeds if you agree," she said. "They think your case perfectly illustrates what can go wrong and how homeowners can fight back." I thought about it for a few days before agreeing. If my experience could help educate people about their rights and warn them about the potential for HOA overreach, then it was worth sharing more widely. The book came out the following year. It was called Governing the Governed: The Dark Side of Homeowners Associations, and my chapter was titled The Shovel That Broke the Board. Reading about my own experience in published form was strange. It felt like something that had happened to someone else, even though I had lived through every moment. The author sent me a box of copies, and I gave them out to neighbors and friends. Mrs. Chen cried when she read it, saying she was so proud that I had not given up. Mr. Richardson said it captured perfectly how helpless people feel when dealing with abusive HOAs. Sarah and Mike told me they were grateful that someone had finally stood up because they had been too scared to do it themselves. Life moved on. I started dating again, something I had not felt ready for during the chaos of the legal battles. I met a woman named Emily at a work conference and we hit it off. When I told her about the shovel incident on our third date, she laughed so hard she nearly spit out her wine. "You are the shovel guy," she said. "My mom sent me that news video last year. She is obsessed with HOA horror stories. It became a funny icebreaker whenever I met new people. Emily's friends and family all knew about it before they met me. But after the initial surprise and questions, people moved on to other topics. I was not defined by the shovel incident, but it was definitely a memorable part of my story. Emily and I got serious over the following months. She lived in Denver but spent weekends at my place in Meadowbrook Commons. She met the neighbors, heard their stories firsthand, and saw how much the community had changed. She said she could not imagine living somewhere with an abusive HOA after hearing everything we had been through. "But you guys fixed it," she pointed out. "You did not just complain or move away. You actually fixed the problem." She was right. We had fixed it together. That was the real story, not just that the HOA board was corrupt, but that the community came together to hold them accountable and create something better. By the time the second anniversary of the shovel theft rolled around, Shovel Day had become an unofficial neighborhood tradition. We gathered at the community pavilion for a potluck dinner. Someone made T-shirts with a shovel logo and Meadowbrook Strong printed underneath. It was cheesy and wonderful. The new HOA president, a retired teacher named Linda Harper, gave a short speech thanking everyone for their engagement and participation in making Meadowbrook Commons a real community. She specifically thanked me for having the courage to speak up when things were wrong, even when it would have been easier to stay quiet. I felt embarrassed by the attention, but also proud. Not proud that I had to fight, but proud that I did not back down. Proud that other people felt empowered to join in. Proud that we created change. Emily surprised me that evening by announcing she was moving in. We had been talking about it, but she made it official in front of the whole neighborhood. Everyone cheered and congratulated us. Mrs. Chen hugged us both and said this community needed more young couples putting down roots. As the sun set and people lingered around the pavilion, sharing food and stories and laughter, I looked around at my neighbors and felt genuinely grateful. Not for the conflict or the stress or Sharon Patterson's vindictive behavior, but for what came after. For the reminder that ordinary people have more power than they think. For the friendships forged through shared struggle. For the proof that speaking up, even about something as seemingly trivial as a stolen shovel, can lead to real change. The expensive shovel still sits in my garage, a reminder of everything that happened. I use it every winter, and every time I do, I think about that moment when I saw the doorbell footage and had to decide whether to let it go or fight back. I am glad I fought. I am glad I did not let them intimidate me into silence. I am glad I trusted that the truth would matter. Because in the end, that is what it came down to. The truth, caught on camera, shared with the community, amplified by the media, and confirmed by investigators. The truth that Sharon Patterson, Deborah Wilkins, and Patricia Marsh had abused their power, stolen from homeowners, and tried to bully anyone who questioned them. The truth that they had forgotten they were supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. And the truth that a $90 snow shovel could become a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny, a catalyst for change, and ultimately, evidence in a criminal case that brought justice to an entire neighborhood. I never expected to become the shovel guy, but looking back, I would not change it. The experience shaped me, taught me, and connected me to my community in ways I never anticipated. It reminded me that standing up for what is right matters, even when it is hard, even when it seems small, even when you are not sure anyone will listen. They listened. The neighbors, the media, the police, the district attorney, and eventually a judge. They all listened because the evidence was clear and the injustice was obvious. And in listening, they helped create accountability where there had been none. That is the real story. Not just that a shovel was stolen, but that when it was, someone decided to fight back, and a community rallied behind them, and justice eventually prevailed. It is a story about the power of documentation, the importance of speaking truth, and the possibility of change when people refuse to accept abuse as normal. 3 years after everything happened, I still live in Meadowbrook Commons with Emily. We got married in a small ceremony at the community pavilion, officiated by Craig Morrison and attended by most of the neighborhood. Mrs. Chen made the cake. Mr. Richardson provided music. It was perfect. The neighborhood continues to thrive under fair and transparent governance. The HOA exists to serve its purpose, maintaining common areas and ensuring property values, without the drama and corruption that once defined it. New residents moving in are often surprised by how engaged and friendly everyone is, not realizing the battle that was fought to create this atmosphere. Sometimes I give talks at community centers and libraries about HOA rights and how to advocate for yourself. I share my story, show the doorbell footage, and encourage people to document everything and not be afraid to stand up to abuse. The rooms are always full, which tells me this problem is widespread. But they are also full of hope, full of people who believe they can make a difference in their own communities. And they can. If a stolen snow shovel in Lakewood, Colorado could bring down a corrupt HOA board and lead to criminal convictions, then anything is possible. It just takes someone willing to speak up, document the truth, and refuse to back down when bullies try to intimidate them into silence. That someone happened to be me, and I am proud of that. Not because I wanted conflict or attention, but because when the moment came, I made the choice to fight for what was right. And in doing so, I discovered strength I did not know I had, built a community I am proud to be part of, and created a story that continues to inspire others facing similar battles. The shovel sits in my garage, scarred with residue from evidence tape, a silent witness to everything that happened. Every winter when I grab it to clear snow, I am reminded of that January morning when Sharon Patterson thought she could take my property without consequences. She was wrong. And her being wrong changed everything for me, for the neighborhood, and for anyone who hears this story and realizes they do not have to accept abuse from people with a little bit of power. That is the legacy of the stolen shovel. Not theft, but resistance. Not victimization, but empowerment. Not silence, but truth. And ultimately, not defeat, but justice.